To believe or not to believe, that is the podcast. Hello and welcome, my friends. My name is Faye, and this is where I sit down with my good friend Adam to talk about, well, spooky stuff. So I want to ask you, do you believe in ghosts, hauntings, paranormal shenanigans? I don't, but I love hearing about them, and honestly, I would love to be wrong. My friend Adam, he does, and he has a lifetime of experiences to back it up. So, buckle up, because today we are talking about Skinwalker Ranch. Adam, when I say Skinwalker Ranch, what is the first thing that comes to your mind?
Well, that's a good question. And by the way, thank you for having me today, Faye.
Having you to your own podcast. You're welcome. Yeah. You're so welcome.
Well, Skinwalker Ranch, I feel like is a state of mind almost. Does that sound crazy?
I mean, maybe a little bit, but explain a little bit more. So, for those who don't know what Skinwalker Ranch is, like, what would you tell them if somebody asked you? So, I've heard about Skinwalker Ranch. What can you tell me about it?
Okay, so Skinwalker Ranch it's a ranch that's over 500 acres. It's in the Uintah Basin in eastern Utah. Eastern Utah? Maybe. Yes. Eastern Utah. I don't think that matters.
I'll take it. Eastern it is.
And Skinwalker Ranch gets its name from skinwalkers. The Native Americans there believed that, evil medicine men known as shamans could shapeshift. And that's where the name Skinwalker comes from. And so for hundreds and thousands of years, there have been stories of these skinwalker shamans that have been known to frequent this valley and terrorize people that live there.
So is this happens everywhere in this area or just on the ranch?
It happens in the whole Uintah Basin, and it's definitely not constrained to this ranch. People all around in the surrounding cities and towns have had very weird experiences that range from UFO type experiences, poltergeist experiences, rips in the dimension. I remember there was a story of a sheriff there years ago who was getting calls about lions and tigers and gorillas
and bears.
Oh my, just running through the sagebrush out there, which, if you know anything about Utah, that's just not something that happens in Utah. We don't have, wild gorillas that roam the area. It's just not possible.
So wild, like zoo animals, but that's not substantiated. Nobody else saw anything. It was just like somebody called in with that?
Well, locals were complaining about it, and the sheriff even is on record saying that he saw these things. And there was a time even when locals were seeing pterodactyls flying in the sky. So there's something going on in the area. Locals believe there's a rip in time and space in this valley. And so that's why we're getting all the weird phenomenon here.
That's crazy. Mm-hmm. But, I'm a sucker for a Jurassic Park movie.
Yeah.
So,
I've definitely tried to see some dinosaurs over the years, but I haven't.
Oh.
That'd be cool.
Shoot. I don't know why, but that just made me think of Land Before Time series. I would love to
if we
unsee. No.
Together.
Did you know there are like 15 of those movies?
There probably are, yeah.
I would love to unsee like all of them except for the first one.
I loved that first one. That was one of my favorites as a kid.
I wept
too.
Wept, and I still sing that song.
And then, of course, there's a whole conspiracy story about the girl that played Triceratops.
Oh my gosh, I know. Not Triceratops. The Ducky.
Ducky.
It was Ducky.
Was it Ducky?
Her dad killed her.
Yeah, her dad killed her.
Ugh.
And that was her last, one of her first and last things. Oh my gosh.
It's awful.
Yeah, that's for another podcast.
Yeah, we'll talk about that later. So back to Skinwalker Ranch instead of young children being murdered. Sorry, I went there. That was my fault for bringing in. Just promise me right now that you will never lend your vocal abilities to a Land Before Time film. Right now.
No, but I love that song Diana Ross did, and I will record it someday. I can play it on the piano.
Oh, absolutely.
Really, really love it. Okay.
It's beautiful.
It is.
Okay,
Classic.
So back to our Skinwalker Ranch. So people have obviously been having tons of crazy stuff that they have said have happened or have seen happen. I happen to know that you have personally been to Skinwalker Ranch a couple times, right?
I've been dozens of times.
Oh, wow. That's more than I even realized.
Dozens and dozens. I've spent the night out there star watching, stargazing, with my paranormal group I was in that was called Unknown Utah. And I started going out there, I think, in about 2007, 2008, before this was ever this craze that it is now on TV.
Yeah, because it's blown up like crazy in the last, since like early 2000s, I feel like. Before that, I don't feel like anyone was really talking about it.
No, the thing that got this all started was the book that's called Hunt for the Skinwalker that follows the Sherman family who owned what is now called Skinwalker Ranch. The Shermans owned the ranch in the mid-90s. And because of that, because of the horrible experiences they had, a book was written, and that's kind of what made this all take off. And people started flocking to this area in the early 2000s. And then myself, I started going there about 2007.
Wow. Okay, so what are the kinds of things that the Shermans talked about having happened on their ranch? Or actually, you know what? I want to go to your first experience. Let's forget about the Shermans for just a minute. Tell me about your very first visit to Skinwalker Ranch.
Well, I have to preface this story by telling you, before I ever went there, the night before packing up and going away for the weekend, I had this nightmare. And in the nightmare, I was in the sagebrush in the dark, and there was a full moon, and in front of the moon was a tree. Looking down on the ground, I saw thousands of bones of animals just littering in the moonlight, like the ground in the moonlight. And I remember looking up at this tree, and I could hear this horrible breathing. There was this creature standing by the tree that had to have been probably 8 feet tall, and I could see red, glowing eyes, and I could hear the sound of it eating and the sound of flesh ripping. It was less of a nightmare and almost like a vision, and I know people will think this is crazy, but I've always had these experiences with dreams before I go to a place. And this dream was kind of like a warning. And so I was already on edge when I went there that day. The first night we went there, my friend Ryan drove us outside of the ranch. I think it's called the North Vantage Point, where you can kind of see over the ridge. The ranch is on the other side. And we would go there to skywatch and look for UFOs, which we saw tons of UFO activity in the sky. But the first night we went there, I remember pulling over, getting out of the car, getting our chairs out, and we set up, and I look over to my right, and there is the tree from this nightmare. And the moon was behind it, and I grabbed a flashlight to look around because I was already freaking out, and on the floor, on the ground, were thousands of bones of every animal you could think of, goats, deer, cows. And so that was my very first introduction to that area. And I knew at that point that it was definitely a vibe.
I know people can't see me here, but like I get chills when you tell that story. It's crazy to me that you would dream about something like that and then have it.
Girl, me too.
be there. So what do you feel like the creature, like you didn't see the creature when you were there in real life, but in the dream you did.
In the dream, it's hard to explain. It was an absence of light. So it was an outline, but I could see these two red eyes that were just glowing. And I could hear the sound of it eating. And I could hear the sound of flesh ripping and bones cracking. And I still can hear it all these years later. 15 something years later, I can just hear it in my mind.
Oh my gosh. So do you feel like it had like an animalistic quality? When we talk about skinwalkers.
Yes. Yeah, it had a vibe that was ancient. It had an ancient kind of vibe, something that had been there for thousands of years. It wasn't something that was of this time, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Okay, so this is just one of the kind of experiences that people have had here at Skin, like we're there. We're here right now.
I'm there in my mind.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No.
They're at Skinwalker Ranch. So the Shermans had similar things going on with them, right? Can you tell us about some of the experiences that they had while they lived and owned the ranch?
Absolutely. So the Shermans, they bought that ranch. He was a cattle rancher, and he had some I don't know anything about cows, but he had some sort of very expensive breed of cow that went for so much money, and he had been making bank off of them. Delicious. I love me a hamburger. But his cattle was his livelihood. And so when he got this ranch, he had gotten it for such a good deal. And one thing he noticed when he moved into the house, he and his wife, they noticed that inside all of the bedrooms were not just one latch, but multiple latches. And in the closets in the bedrooms were multiple latches in the closets to lock.
Latches as in locks.
Locks to lock yourself inside of the closet. And this was on all of them. And that was their first kind of little...
Welcome home.
Welcome, yeah. Terry and Gwen did not know what to think of this when they saw this.
Oh, I know exactly what I'd think. Serial killers. The people were serial killers. They had locks on the closets because they were keeping people in them.
Well, if you met some of the people that live out here, no offense, yeah, they do give that vibe.
Oh, gosh.
Don't come for me. Yeah, so Terry was a very practical man, and he did not believe in nonsense. Gwen was similar, but Gwen started having things happen to her, and...
No, from what I remember, they were very respected in the community, too, right? Like...
Yeah, they were very respected. Like I said, he was no nonsense, and they were pillars in the community. So when things started happening and police were starting to be called, that's when, locals knew that maybe there was more to this that was going on. But I remember one of the first experiences that Gwen had, she went into the town to go shopping. And for those of you that don't know, the closest town there, I want to say, is Roosevelt. It's this little town, and they have like a True Value and a grocery store. It's all combined. And she went grocery shopping. And she comes back, and when you get to Skinwalker Ranch, you go through this gate and open it, and then you drive, maybe 100 yards or so to the main house. There's multiple houses. So she goes to the house down this long drive and starts unloading the car, and she's putting the groceries away. She goes into the bathroom, and then she comes out after using the bathroom really quick, and all of the groceries are back out of the cupboards, and the cupboards are all completely open. So that was her first kind of, what's going on here?
So not a very helpful entity? What would you call that? What?
Poltergeist.
Poltergeist?
Poltergeist activity.
You couldn't put the things away, you had to undo all of her hard work.
Why don't you Swiffer the floors while you're at it, entity?
Entity?
Anyhow, yes, there's poltergeist activity going on, and...
Wolves. Okay, tell me about that. I know that there's been a lot of, we talk about
Yeah, there's a lot of wolves that are seen, and then there's a lot of reservations. I mean, this place is correct. Oh my gosh. This place is surrounded by BLM, which is not Black Lives Matter, it's the Bureau of Land Management. It's reservations. The Native Americans still live there, and they have tons of, they're called reservation dogs. There's wild dogs that just run around on the roads, and, at night and stuff, they will attack people. And so it's kind of unsafe to go by yourself out here. But the one thing that people were starting to see, and this family was seeing, was a wolf. And this big, beautiful wolf would come up to the house, and it was as tall as I am probably, and I'm 6 feet tall, so it probably went up to their shoulders. And they later found out that this wolf is what is known as a dire wolf, and they've been extinct for over 10,000 years. All this weirdness is good and fine, but the thing at the end of the day that was really making Terry mad was his cattle. They were dying. They were being mutilated. He was finding them eaten in the sagebrush, and this wolf would always be around, and so he started to bring his shotgun and look for this wolf. One time, the wolf did take one of his cows right in front of him, just grabbed it by the neck and ripped it down to the ground and over this little hill, and so he started shooting at the wolf. He shot the wolf multiple times with a huge shotgun. It should have been dead, and it just sat and looked at him. It just stood and looked at him. It didn't even flinch. And then it just walked away down the hill and disappeared.
Definitely unnerving. That's the kind of thing that I've heard when researching stuff, because I'm into that. Skinwalkers, like that is a very common thing that something will happen, there'll be an altercation, and they shoot at each other, and it does absolutely nothing.
Yeah, and a lot of these shamans who shapeshift into these skinwalkers, they do take the form of a wolf. So you're right. And that brings me back to the locks on the closets. So one night, the couple found what they were for. And the thing that they would see very often in the evenings coming up out of the sagebrush are these orbs of light. They are beautiful, multicolored, almost like Christmas lights, and they were so mesmerizing. But when the balls of light would come towards the property, towards the house, the Shermans would be filled with fear. Something about these orbs, when they got closer, it actually made you think of everything that you were ever terrified of, and it would bring fear out of you to the point where, he would get sick. And they would just surround the house and go in the house and start chasing the couple. So they ended up going into the closet one of these nights and locking themselves in. And it was at that point they realized why there were locks on all of the rooms, because the family before had to have been terrified by these orbs that would follow them.
Okay, and you may not have an answer to this, which is totally fine. First of all, it reminds me of Dementors, Harry Potter. Ooh. There we go. Following people around, taking all their happiness. Yes. But okay, so how would the orbs have gotten, they couldn't go through the closet doors, but they were able to get in the house? How would that have worked?
Well, they were coming through an open door, following them into the living room. But they didn't go through walls, I guess.
So they couldn't, go through things.
I guess not, no.
But were able to get, close enough that it was...
And I will say I've seen these orbs in real life with my eyes, with my eyeballs. And they do something to you. It made me think, when I saw them coming up out of the sagebrush one night, it just drummed up everything that I'd ever been scared of, almost like your life was flashing before your eyes, and you would start remembering anything that had ever scared you.
Wow.
In your life. It's so hard to explain, but there is something about these balls of light, and they are terrifying, and they look so beautiful too, but...
I mean, I think that anybody who's spent any time in any desert can tell you that there are things in the sky that we don't know, right? UFOs, unidentified flying objects. A lot of them are lights, different kinds of things that people have videos of. You can look them up, you can find them. They're out there. I grew up in a desert, and you definitely see just I don't know, lights, places. I don't know what they would be, but I've definitely seen things like that. So it's totally understandable that other people would be seeing these.
Yeah, and people say, well, it's swamp gas or ball lightning, which that is definitely a possibility. Well, no, it's not a possibility in my case. I mean, it's something that could happen, but after seeing it myself, I know that it's not because these things were intelligent. They were actually, they seemed like almost like beings, like people, like.
So do you feel like they like reacted to you being there?
Yes. Yeah, and it's so funny because I was telling the story about the balls of light when they appeared when we were in a car. And that's the thing with Skinwalker Ranch. It's it's the one place in the world I've been where I cannot tell you what it is, but it's intelligent and it listens to you. And you could be telling a story. For example, I was there one night sky watching, and I was telling my group about a recent trip to the Queen Mary, ghost hunting, and how we had heard the sound of a little girl that was crying in the pool. And as I'm telling the story, we all hear a little girl in the sagebrush. So it's like this place can hear what you're saying, and it makes it materialize out there in the desert.
Because she should not have been out without a Corona.
There were no little girls
time.
out in the. And it was like a steep drop off down into the ranch, so there was no way there was a child in the rocks out there. But that's what I'm saying. This place reminds me of one of those like angler fish with the little ball of light above it.
Nemo.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
It's like, come closer, and then I'll eat you. I'll eat your soul. So this place messes with you.
Man.
And there's so many theories as to why, from anything from radiation, messing with your mind, to, aliens.
Yeah.
And I couldn't tell you which one it is.
Okay, so that actually brings me to a question that I'd had. Skinwalker Ranch is such an interesting thing to me, particularly because of all of the varied types of paranormal activity that go on there. Like, we're not just talking about hauntings or just skinwalkers, but also UFO sightings, right? All of this. And I'm wondering, mostly, do you classify those as different things? Is this a normal thing to have those intersect each other, to have all of those things happening in the same place? Does that happen other places?
No, not really. Not like this. But there are theories that when people see angels or spirits, they're actually seeing aliens and things connected to UFOs and interdimensional beings. So there's so many theories as to what it could be. But I will say that there's never been one place I've ever been where I've seen crypto things like Bigfoot type things, ghosts, and even aliens.
So that's something that's very intriguing to me, that all of these things would be there at the same place. Now, I was looking at some things and I found out about your 2008 visit. And you posted in the video, you shared some footage from '08 that was one of your first visits to the ranch. And you explained in real time what was going on in these videos. And in the videos, it was really hard to see. We could see balls of light that were moving. They were kind of strobing on and off. But one of the things that you talked about was that all three of the people in your group were witnessing the same things, and they were not caught in the footage. Can you explain a little bit more about that?
Yeah, and that's where people theorize that because of the radiation and because of in the ground itself, it's actually proven there's radioactive material in the ground there. And it's at very alarmingly high rates, apparently.
Don't drink the water.
Don't drink the water. And so maybe it causes mass hallucination. But in that video you're speaking of, I remember we were looking at the ridge by Skinwalker Ranch, and we were seeing these lights move around, and these were miles away. And I would ask the lights, just in my little tiny voice here across the desert, to do something like go to the left, go to the right, and it would do what we were saying. and everyone was seeing it, but it was not showing up on the camera. So we were all either having some sort of mass hallucination, or it's just the technology that's used or something with these UFOs just can't be registered on camera, which people say is both.
Yeah, I mean, because you're absolutely not the only people to have had this happen, which brings me to one of the most interesting parts of Skinwalker Ranch that I feel like is, it's just a very unique thing, is that it was purchased by Robert Bigelow, who was a scientist, billionaire, super
So
smart
rich.
dude, very, very rich. And his whole reason behind the purchase was that he wanted to set up the National Institute for Discovery Science. NIDS. And every time I think it's NIPS.
I always think of SIDS. Sudden infant death
SIDS
syndrome.
and NIPS. They picked a good.
Yeah, the National Institute for Discovery Science. And I remember when he bought that, the ranch, people had so many stories in the town about who he was, what he was doing. They all had their opinion. And a lot of people were not having it, especially the natives that lived there. Their big thing with skinwalkers is you don't talk about it. You don't even say the word. And I remember going in the grocery store and just trying to talk to people and interview them, and they were not having it whatsoever.
Do you feel like that was because they were like sick of people asking, or was it like did it seem like it was an actual like fear-based reaction?
Both. It was both. But yes, it is a cultural thing. And even in my culture, in the Polynesian culture, we have skinwalkers too. So it's kind of crazy. I can relate to the stories that they would tell here in Utah. And the thing with them is you don't ask about something you don't want to see. And they say, nobody who really knows what it is would ever want to see it. So why would you ever ask about it? So we just don't talk about it. And anyone who's going out there to look for it, they just shake their head and
kind of asking for trouble,
yeah,
sort of a thing.
You are.
Yeah, so all of the scientists. So Bigelow brought in a bunch of top scientists, military officials, different things like that. And they actually ran experiments and watched for like 10 years.
They did. They set up bait pens with cows. And just like Jurassic Park, looks just like Jurassic Park. They'd have a cow staked in the ground, and there'd be a little enclosure with fencing and cameras. And there were times when Robert and his team would have the cows be taken away, and they'd be mutilated in the night, but the cameras could not capture it.
Yeah.
And they would find the cameras, they were up on these tall, almost telephone pole height poles, and they would be completely trashed. The cameras would be bent and ripped to pieces, and there was no video evidence of how it happened because there'd be multiple cameras pointing onto other cameras, and for some reason they could never catch what was doing this.
So that's the kind of thing that this is exactly the kind of thing that just gets into my brain and makes me so fascinated by this, because when you get a group of, multiple people who are, intelligent, educated.
Yeah, they're the top of the top in their fields.
You get them together as a group and they're all having experiences like this that they don't. I mean, one of the things that I read was talking about how they all admitted that they were able to write down over 100, like hundreds of things that happened, but none of them could be substantiated scientifically. And so there was no way for them to actually, they had no proof when it comes down to it. Like, they experienced these things, all of them, for years, but couldn't prove any of it. And that, to me, is what is, so fascinating.
Now, that's what makes this place so very different than anywhere I've ever been. And I've been to hundreds of places, hundreds of locations. And the experiences I've had and my friends have had, this is something a movie could be made of, and I think they've made a movie. there's so many. Every time I have gone to this area, I've had something happen paranormal, and that is not something I can say about anywhere else in the world. And I'm sure it's the same case with Robert and his team. And there's so many theories as to what Robert was actually doing. I remember that he did buy a lot of real estate in the town, and even one of my friends owned property near, butting up to his property. And part of buying the land is you're not allowed to dig holes in the ground out there. And people say it's because there is something under the ground, an Air Force base, a UFO. They call it, the next Area 51. And people think that maybe even Robert was doing some sort of top secret testing under the ground in this area. So who knows? Another thing that locals believe is there's a huge network of tunnels and caves under this whole valley that contains gold and other precious metals, Aztec gold, and even gold that was hidden by the Mormons when they first came to Utah. They had hidden gold out in these cave systems. So there could be more to the no digging than just Robert Bigelow.
There's gold, and then there hills.
There's gold.
Yeah, so that actually brings me kind of perfectly to what's going on right now, which I had no idea about this until actually last night when I was looking at this. Have you seen or heard of the History Channel Skinwalker Ranch?
So you're speaking of Brandon, right? Brandon Fugel.
Yes, sir. What do you know about him?
Well, I know that he is a Utahn, very rich billionaire Mormon, and he bought the ranch from the government, I believe. I think the government bought it from Robert Bigelow, and then Brandon came in and took this ranch over, and he again brought the top scientists in the world, and he is as well getting stumped about what's going on there, and he's not capturing what he needs to, and he's having all of the same things with the cattle mutilations. He's having workers that are having to go to the hospital. Speaking of digging holes, I know one of his workers was out in the field digging a hole one day, and as he was digging it, he said the back of his scalp started hurting, and his head started to rip open in the back, and he was getting scalped, and he thinks it had something to do with this curse. There's a curse on Skinwalker Ranch, and he almost died from it, and he's had to have hundreds of stitches. I don't know the story. It just sounds crazy. But he chalks it up to the ranch and the Native American land, messing with him for digging on the ranch. So
that's nuts. Do they have, obviously there's only so much. Did they, show any, I don't know how to ask this. Did they show any of that, on the show? Do they show?
They did. I think they did show him going to the hospital, but I know that he almost died, and he really did go to the hospital, and something happened where his head started to form a hole and just rip open in the back, and he claims it was while he was digging this hole, and every time he dug a new hole and stuck that shovel into the ground, his head started to open up more and more in the back, which sounds insane.
I would love to see the X-ray, MRI, whatever went along with that would be
the thing you have to remember too is it is a television show and they exaggerate everything. But the thing with Skinwalker Ranch is you don't need to exaggerate it. That's what makes me so mad when I see these shows just making a fool, because they don't need to. Even if you don't have evidence every time, just being there and showing people the area, that's scary enough, I think.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I really appreciate about you and being able to talk about this kind of thing is that you're very honest and down to earth with things that you have experienced. And if you haven't experienced it, you'll straight up say, yeah, I was there.
Yeah.
Nothing happened.
That's the thing with my YouTube channel is I never will make up evidence. I won't. And I have people tell me all the time, because I have some crazy videos on my channel of spirits and full body apparitions, and I'm not going to post it unless I've done all my research to make sure it's not something else, because I've spent over 20 years doing this, and B, I will never fake stuff. So there's no need to out here.
Yeah. So it looks, or it sounds like, I haven't watched any of it, but it sounds like...
It's painful. I hope I don't get blacklisted, because I know people that know these people. It is painful to watch, I think.
But they're doing all kinds of like digging and stuff that before they weren't supposed to have been allowed to. So this, and I came up with this all by myself. So like, I don't really do, what are they called? Conspiracy theories. I don't really do that, but something I was thinking of when they were doing this, I was like, well, obviously, like, did they get rid of all the stuff that they needed to have covered up? Like, in the 10 years that, I mean, so back in, like, 2004 was when they totally shut down all of the NIDS stuff. Yes. And he was working there. They did have a contract with the Pentagon.
With the government.
With the government that is proven. Like, yes. they have it.
The government took over for a minute.
So then when in 2016, when they finally sold it to someone who was obviously going to try to make money off of it,
yes.
I don't think that you can say that Mr. Fugel wasn't planning on, cashing in this cash cow, milking this cash cow.
Well, I don't think he needs the money, but I do feel like it's a lot of these really rich boys with their toys. Like, they just want a sandbox to play in.
Yeah.
And maybe it's that. Maybe it's just they're so bored, they want something fun to do. That sounds really rude, and I apologize. I'm not trying to be a jerk, but it really is. There's so many people that have owned this that have had just more money than God, and I think they just are buying it because they're interested, just like us. Mm-hmm. And they have all the resources, and it's just kind of fun and interesting for them.
Why not?
Why not?
Haunted ranch.
Have a haunted ranch.
But what I'm thinking is the government had this contract back in 2004 is when they say that everything kind of got shut down with Mr. Bigelow. And then it was that long after that they finally sold it to someone who was going to take it and run with it. So my thought was kind of like, well, they had all that time. If there was something that they were doing or something that they didn't want people to know about or tests that they were doing, they had all of that time to kind of
cover it up
or get rid of it or...
Oh, that's very true. That is true. Sorry, I wasn't understanding the question, ma'am, but now it's it's all coming back to me now, Celine Dion.
It's all coming back.
But yeah, probably. I mean, it's the government. Who knows? But they definitely were doing things out there, and the town was just abuzz about it. And
so now they're digging. They're doing all of these kinds of things. I mean, the locals can't be thrilled about it. Or are they? I don't know.
No,
when was the last time
not.
you were out there?
I was out there just like a year ago, and I was there being interviewed for a TV show called Blind Frog Ranch, which is a ranch that's also in the basin there, and they're having all of the exact same issues as Skinwalker Ranch.
The name's not as cool.
Not as cool.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's named after there are actually blind frogs, that thousands of them that live out in this, there's a swamp area in this land. And that team is also, they have their TV show and they're hunting for this gold I was telling you about a minute ago. And their big thing is they went out there, they're from Texas. They want to make millions in finding all this hidden Mormon gold and Aztec gold that's supposedly under their property.
All right, that's just about it for us, but I have a quick little lightning round for you. Are you ready?
I am ready.
Okay, Skinwalker Ranch. Is it haunted?
Yes.
Skinwalker Ranch. Will you take me there?
I guess I could.
Yeah.
In the daytime. I don't want to go at night. It's creepy.
Do you think I could handle it? Would I
you
be
could.
like a basket case? I'd just
No,
come back
I
and
think
be
you'd
like,
be fine. Because you're a skeptic mind. You would just be like, are we going to go to taco time yet? Because I'm ready for the taco time.
I love tacos.
I love their chicken burritos, their crisp tacos.
I don't think taco time. Do we have one?
We have one by Skinwalker Ranch. That's why I mentioned it. Because I go there every time.
Okay, done for the tacos.
Oh, it's an alarm. It's time for
And just
tacos.
like that, we're done.
And we're out of time. Well, you heard it here, folks. We're done. So, Faye?
We're done.
And you're done. You're basic. So let me ask you, Faye, to believe or not to believe, that is the podcast. That is the name of this podcast. Do you feel like you've come out on the other side more of a believer? What are your thoughts, Faye? Tell us now.
Well, I think that...
Thank you for listening to Be or Not to Be, that is the podcast. Feel free to follow us under the same name on Facebook, or if you'd like to go on my fun and spooky travel adventures, you can see me on YouTube at my channel, The Paranormal Polynesian Travel. Goodbye, and have a fantastic day.